Welcome to Gateway Geeks. This is a short, we'll call it a Gateway Geeks PSA about net neutrality. So you probably heard a lot about this in the recent past, and every couple times a year this will come back up, and we'll have to go through this again. So essentially what's happening right now is Ajit Pai, who is the commissioner of the FCC, is going to attempt tomorrow or today to repeal net neutrality sort of stipulations that have been put into place by various entities, partly by the Obama administration and Pai's predecessor. So what is net neutrality? Just really briefly, the internet is constructed on publicly owned and or publicly built infrastructure. So all of these things, but what internet service providers, the ISP, kind of provides to the user is that what's called the on-ramp onto the internet. So they basically connect your house to that infrastructure, and they help to maintain that infrastructure, and that's the service that they provide. So this is, like I said, this is the on-ramp to the information superhighway, as Al Gore might say. So meaning that these companies basically just take internet from the street to your house, and they'll charge you $60 for it. Net neutrality just says that these companies have to treat all the sites that you might visit the same. So if you log into a site, you should be able to log into another site at the same speed. Okay, so there's always going to be site optimization. There's going to be things that slow down accessing that site a little bit potentially. But let's say an example Chris used that I think is a good one was this Verizon idea. So Verizon is one of the companies pushing against trying to stop net neutrality. Incidentally, Ajit Pai is a former attorney for Verizon, and now he's the FCC commissioner. You can see why this might be a problem. But so basically, if you live out in the boondocks, and Southern Illinois, I know for a fact, has this, and you have to use a Verizon hotspot. So it's sort of like an LTE kind of thing, but it's the way that you connect to the internet rather than cable or fiber or something like that. So if you use that, you're using Verizon, and you want to do a Google search. If net neutrality didn't exist, Verizon, the internet service provider, could actually make it take longer for you to use Google than to use, let's say, Yahoo, because Verizon has business connections, owns Yahoo, the Yahoo search engine. Okay, so the problem with net neutrality is that these different types of traffic can be prioritized based on what is most advantageous to the internet service provider. So you can see, and we can imagine various arguments against. The only real arguments I've seen for this, there was an article in Forbes a couple weeks ago by a guy named Larry Downs, who's a sort of internet, definitely, luminary is definitely not the right word, pundit, we'll say. Somehow it's going to increase competition in the marketplace, by which he means it's going to make it so you have to pay for things that used to be free. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But I can tell you from a librarian perspective, from someone who creates content for the internet, if you, let's say, wanted to access this video and there was no net neutrality, you can imagine that if I or people like me or people who are vastly more popular than Gateway Geeks decided to create a video like this, that video could be sort of de-optimized, could be more difficult to download, more difficult to access, more difficult to even upload. Let's say if you're somehow flagged as someone who's problematic for the market free enterprise interests of whatever ISP. So this can be a real big problem. In addition to that, there's all kinds of other things that, I mean, there's no problem with innovation in terms of what is the way that we interact with the internet. Innovation is often code, if you haven't gathered this, for big corporations, big companies to charge you more. And there is no ceiling on that, okay? In terms of just sort of traditional Keynesian economics, right? The idea is that at some point the market would stop valuing whatever it is you are selling, or the price of what you were selling would rise to a point where it was no longer sustainable. There weren't enough people willing to pay that price, and then you would have to lower the price in order to continue to sell that product. Well, I mean, what's kind of happening with these companies infiltrating the upper echelons of government and these regulatory bodies is, instead of the price going down, what you're seeing is they are finding ways to continue to jack up the price in another fashion. So if you can't raise the price of, let's say, providing internet anymore, which they totally still can, but if you can't raise that price anymore, what you can do is you can add little things on top of that. It's sort of like DLC in video games. You have the whole picture, everything the internet provides. You can cut out a little corner of that and put it on top of the price. And so then instead of $70 a month, you have $70 a month plus $5 a month for messaging, plus $5 a month for Facebook, plus $10 a month for streaming services on top of the $10 a month that you already pay for Netflix, right? So this is actually the problem. This is what's happened in Spain and Portugal. Is the ISP charges you a service fee for things that are provided for free by a company. So they're not actually charging you to log on to Facebook. They're charging you to use Facebook, to take Facebook, or really a better example would be something like messaging, like Snapchat or Messenger, or really streaming video service. So because streaming video service takes up such a huge amount of bandwidth, they can charge you an actual fee just to use a streaming service. So in the same way that you can buy a lamp and you own that lamp, you cannot turn that lamp on if it is an electric lamp unless it is plugged into the wall and unless you're paying your power bill. So it's kind of the same thing the internet service providers can do. So they're selling you cable access to that infrastructure, and then they're also selling you ongoing access to utilize that infrastructure to get products from other places. So that's a whole other layer, and a sort of commodity, not really commodity, like a constructed market. Okay, so more than 80% of all net neutrality comments. This is from an article in October, by the way. This situation is since changed just a little bit. But so the FCC and these various other kind of watchdogs organizations, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, some of these organizations, government and nonprofit, went through and they sort of combed through some of these public comments that had been submitted to the FCC. What they found was that over 80% of all net neutrality comments were sent by bots. Okay? Researchers say, according to this Motherboard article, that 95% of all organic comments favored net neutrality. Okay? An organic comment is a comment that is created by a person who is not being paid to create that comment. Okay? So it's sort of earnest commentary, if you will. More than 10% of responses, according to an article, very same article in fact, were too specific bot comments against net neutrality. So that's 10% of the responses out of the 80% of all net neutrality, anti-net neutrality comments. Okay, so now these findings are being used by Ajit Pai and the anti-net neutrality crowd to sort of justify ignoring public comments, which they were going to do anyway. Right now it's Pai, 2 Republicans, and then 2 Democrats, and that is the commission. Okay, so former Verizon lawyer. We're pretty sure we know what he's doing. He's in there to dismantle regulation. That's kind of why he took the job, I would imagine. There's an Ars Technica article that came out just a little bit later. Came out earlier this month. There are quote 50,000 consumer complaints missing from the public record that the FCC maintains at this point. Democratic FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel said yesterday 28 Democratic senators, led by Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, also called out the 50,000 consumer complaints that seem to have been excluded from the public record in the proceeding. And this is from a letter that these folks wrote to Ajit Pai last week. There was a really interesting interview with Gary Kasparov on the Pre-Pahara podcast, where Gary Kasparov, if you don't know, he's a former world chess champion. He's in his 40s now, but he was talking about how in Russia, what they used to do is they used to just shove down your throat this positive view of Soviet Russia, right? Things may not be going so well right now, but we have all these lofty ideological sort of goals, okay? Since Putin has sort of come to power, it's been more, we are besieged on all sides by America, by the European Union, by NATO, by ISIS, by all these different organizations. We're besieged, and Vladimir Putin is the only thing standing between civilization and darkness, essentially. So one of the ways that they get this message out is that they sort of challenge an idea of objective truth. And this is a danger of postmodernism. So one of the things that's happening is where it used to be, they would just straight up lie and say, Stalin is fighting for the good of the USSR and he's vanquishing capitalist pigs and everything. Now what they're kind of saying is, well, Putin may be kind of corrupt. He may be a bit of a strong man, maybe a bit of a dictator, but everyone else is terrible too. And Putin he's our terrible. He's the best of the worst, right? So that's kind of the old sort of Russian way of blurring the issue. And that's kind of what Ajit Pai has done with the FCC, where he's saying, well, some of these comments might be true, some of them might not be true. We don't really know, so we're just going to ignore them all and just do what we wanted to do anyway. There is no objective or useful public commentary because we can't make absolutely certain that all of it is completely legitimate. Okay? That argument, to me, is less important than the facts at hand, right? In any sort of public endeavor, you're always going to have people on both sides who are not there for earnest purposes, who are not there to actually help the process. They're there to get their little, scraps from the table and then run away, or they're there at the behest of someone else to sort of throw a wrench in the works. Those things always happen in political processes. The point of keeping net neutrality is that we need to protect and sort of somewhat, and the digital divide is a very real thing. It's something librarians talk about all the time, but in general, many Americans, a large number of Americans, have access to the internet. They can get access at public libraries. They can get access all over the place. Pretty much, if you're not in jail and you're willing to go to a public place, there is a way for you to get internet access, okay? Public libraries, just go to a public library. But all that being said, we need to make sure that we are thinking about the real problems with the internet, with access to the internet, with internet infrastructure, instead of getting bogged down in these attempts by people like Ajit Pai to kind of siphon off more and more of our it's not even really disposable income, it's discretionary income for things that used to be free, to make these companies more money and to give us essentially nothing new, okay? So that gets us back around to what happens if Ajit Pai's endeavor here, his attempt, actually passes. So Pai's anti-net neutrality order, it's really expected to pass tomorrow, but advocates of the open internet will at least have their day in court, I think. In fact, it may be more than a year before the U.S. Court of Appeals finishes sort of reviewing Pi's order and anything actually happens. There's always the chance that Pi's legacy will be crushed in the process by any number of things potentially. So what's next? Well, Pi recently posted something up on Twitter. Says this was December 11th. This was 2 days ago. The Federal Trade Commission and Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, announced their intent to enter into a memorandum of understanding under which the two agencies would coordinate online consumer protections following the adoption of the Restoring Internet Freedom Order. The Restoring Internet Freedom Order is the attempt to get rid of net neutrality. It is deceptively titled. So the Memorandum of Understanding will be a critical benefit for online consumers because it outlines the robust process by which the FCC and the FTC will safeguard the public interest, said FCC Chairman Ajit Pai. Instead of saddling the internet with heavy-handed regulations, we will work together to take targeted action against bad actors. Yeah, that's what always happens when you deregulate. The approach protected a free and open internet for many years prior to the FCC's 2015 Title II order. It will once again follow the adoption of Restoring Internet Freedom Order. The FTC is committed to ensuring that internet service providers live up to the promises they make to consumers. Blah blah blah. Yeah, fat chance. This is what Pi is suggesting. What he's saying is, okay, we're going to take all of these official regulations off the table, but then don't worry, we'll take care of you. Yeah, don't buy it. That we support net neutrality because we support access as librarians. We support creativity and innovation in the original sense of the word innovation, but it's as close to a public commons as we get in a capitalist society. So we need to make sure that it stays that way. And actually, really, I honestly would advocate eventually turning it into a utility like a power company or a gas company. But that's just my 2 cents. Let me know what you think below or on Twitter or on the Gateway Geeks website. You can get to us at contact at gatewaygeeks.com. I'm Joe, and I will talk to you all next podcast.